Been caught. He was sorry his secret was out, but not for the destruction he had caused. As the conversation dragged on, I felt a cold, hollow emptiness inside. I had been fighting for so long to keep my family intact, to protect my children from pain, but I couldn't protect them from this. I couldn't protect myself from this. The truth had finally come to light, and there was no turning back. I wanted to run, to escape from the reality of it all, but I couldn't. I had to face it. I had to confront the reality that everything was falling apart. And yet, in that moment, as I looked at Paul, the man I once loved and trusted, I knew that I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep living this lie. Our marriage was broken beyond repair. My heart ached for the future that was slipping through my fingers, but deep down, I knew that staying in this toxic relationship would only do more harm. I had to let go, no matter how much it terrified me. The hardest part wasn't confronting Paul. It was the realization that I had to rebuild my life from the ashes of this betrayal. But as the words between us grew quieter, I knew one thing for certain. The life I had known was over, and it was time to move forward. Paul's initial reaction was one of shock. His face paled, and I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. For a split second, I thought he might come clean, might admit the truth, and beg for forgiveness. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by a defensive, almost dismissive attitude. He tried to downplay the affair, claiming it was nothing more than a mistake, that it had happened because we had grown apart. His excuses felt hollow, like empty words meant to absolve him of the guilt I knew he was carrying. But deep down I knew better. I knew that what had happened wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate choice he had made. A choice that hurt not just me, but our family. As the conversation continued, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Paul wasn't just trying to minimize what he had done to me. He was also trying to justify it. He claimed he had been unhappy for years, but instead of seeking help or communicating with me, he had chosen to betray me. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked him why he hadn't come to me, why he hadn't tried to fix things with us instead of seeking solace in the arms of our son's girlfriend. The betrayal cut deeper with every word. "Why Amy?" I demanded, unable to stop myself. "Why her, of all people? She was part of our family. You knew how much Eric loved her. How could you do this to him?" At that moment, I saw the faintest flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it quickly faded. He didn't seem to grasp the full impact of what he had done. His infidelity wasn't just a violation of our marriage. It was a betrayal of our son, someone he had known and loved for years. He had broken a trust that could never be repaired. Paul tried to justify it further, claiming that our marriage had been stale for years, and that he had simply found something in Amy that he had been missing. But his words felt like nothing more than an attempt to deflect blame. He refused to take full responsibility for his actions. I could feel the rage bubbling inside me, but I had to stay calm. I had to hold on to my dignity and my strength, even though everything in me wanted to scream at him, to throw everything he had done to me in his face. The most painful part of all, though, was that I realized he wasn't sorry, at least not in the way I needed him to be. He wasn't sorry for betraying me, or for what he had done to our family. He was sorry his face turned pale, and for a moment I thought I saw guilt flash across his eyes. But then, he quickly recovered and tried to dismiss it. He tried to act like it was no big deal, tried to justify it as something that had been going on because of our stale marriage, as if that somehow made it okay. But I wasn't having it. My emotions exploded. I demanded the truth. I needed him to admit what he had done, to acknowledge the pain he had caused, not just to me, but to our son. The more I pushed, the more defensive he became, and I could see the anger rising in him. It was like he had prepared for this moment, already knowing that the lies would catch up to him. But the hardest part of all was that he was still trying to downplay it. He still didn't seem to fully grasp the magnitude of what he had done. That made my blood boil. He had betrayed not only me, but also our son and the family we had built together. How could he be so heartless, so indifferent to the consequences of his actions? As the conversation grew more heated, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. I wasn't just confronting him. I was confronting the reality that this man, the one I had trusted for so long, was a complete stranger. I was looking at someone who had torn our family apart, and no amount of excuses or empty apologies could ever undo the harm he had caused. I knew the moment of truth had come, but with it came the harsh realization that everything would change. And as terrifying as that thought was, I couldn't go back. The lie had been exposed, and there was no turning back. The moment I confronted Paul, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. The air was thick with tension, each word we exchanged adding weight to an already unbearable situation. I could feel the anger rising in me, mingled with a deep, unshakable sadness. The man I had spent nearly 20 years of my life with, the father of my children, was nothing more than a stranger now. A stranger whose actions had shattered my world in ways I couldn't begin to explain. As I stared at Paul, sitting there so casually, a storm of emotions swirled inside me. I had so many questions, so many accusations, but there was one that kept standing out above all the others. Why Amy? What had driven him to this point? He had so many options, so many ways to handle whatever was lacking in our relationship. Why did he have to choose Amy, the one person who was part of our son's life, someone I trusted, someone I thought of as family? The betrayal cut deeper, because it wasn't just a random affair, it was an intimate violation of everything I held sacred, everything I believed in. The next morning when Paul was leaving for work, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I had to do something. The thought of him walking out the door, leaving me in this limbo, pushed me to act. I grabbed my phone and checked his messages one last time. I needed to know if there was anything new, anything that could give me more of the truth I so desperately needed. What I found was a message from Amy that made my stomach drop. "I can't wait to see you tonight. We'll make sure no one finds out." My hands trembled as I read the words. The betrayal was more complete than I had realized. It wasn't just an emotional affair. It was a full-blown secret relationship. I had no more doubts. It was time. I waited until later that afternoon when Paul came home from work. He was acting unusually calm, and I could tell he had no idea what was coming. My heart was pounding in my chest as I confronted him. I started with the simple truth. "I know what's been going on, Paul. I know about you and Amy." His face turned pale, and for a moment, I thought I saw guilt flash across his eyes. But then, he quickly recovered and tried to dismiss it. He tried to act like it was no big deal, tried to justify it as something that had been going on because of our stale marriage, as if that somehow made it okay. But I wasn't having it. My emotions exploded. I demanded the truth. I needed him to admit what he had done, to acknowledge the pain he had caused, not just to me but to our son. The more I pushed, the more defensive he became, and I could see the anger rising in him. It was like he had prepared for this moment, already knowing that the lies would catch up to him. Me was paralyzed by fear. Fear of what I would hear, fear of what would happen to our family if I exposed the truth. What made everything worse was the fact that my son, Eric, was completely unaware of what was happening. How could I tell him? How could I destroy his world like that? He loved Amy, trusted her, and thought of her as part of our family. How could I ever look him in the eyes and tell him that the woman he loved was involved in something so deeply wrong with his own father? It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, and the thought of breaking his heart was unbearable. I knew that confronting Paul wasn't just about exposing his affair. It was about everything he had hidden from me for years. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the broken promises. The hardest part wasn't just that he had cheated on me, it was that he had done so with someone I had welcomed into our home, someone I had trusted. I wasn't just angry at him. I was angry at myself for not seeing the warning signs, for not protecting my family from the hurt he caused. As much as I wanted to confront Paul, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was terrified of what would happen next. I was terrified of the chaos it would bring, the pain it would cause. But one thing was certain, I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to give. I couldn't let this betrayal define me, define my children. I had to find the strength to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But how? And when? The weight of everything finally became too much to bear. I spent sleepless nights tossing and turning, my mind racing with thoughts of how to handle the situation. I couldn't keep living in this state of fear, uncertainty, and overwhelming betrayal. But each time I thought about confronting Paul, a wave of dread washed over me. What would happen if I told Eric? What would happen if I exposed the truth to my children? How could I ever undo the damage that had already been done? One night, as Paul sat in the living room watching TV, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. I needed to make a decision. I needed to confront him. The facade of normalcy had gone on for too long. It wasn't just my pain I was protecting anymore. It was the integrity of my family, my children's emotional well-being. I couldn't continue pretending that everything was fine when it was clear that it wasn't. My heart ached just thinking about how this would tear everything apart. But the reality was unavoidable, made my blood run cold. I couldn't understand how he could do this to our family, to me, to our son. The realization hit me harder than anything else. This wasn't just about sex or betrayal. This was about power, manipulation, and a complete disregard for the people he was supposed to love. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and I wasn't sure I would ever be able to forgive him. As the days passed, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. A small part of me still hoped I was wrong, that I had somehow misinterpreted everything. But deep down I knew better. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the undeniable truth that my marriage, my family, was being torn apart right before my eyes. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Paul wasn't just drifting away from me, he was actively betraying me. And what terrified me more than anything was that I had been blind to it for so long. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many little things I had brushed off over the years. There were the late nights at the office, the sudden trips he would take without much explanation, and the way he started treating me differently. More critical, more distant. I had always chalked it up to stress or work demands, but now it felt like a pattern. He had been pulling away for months, maybe even years, and I had been too consumed with my own insecurities to see it. But now it all clicked. I replayed the moment I found the thong in our bedroom last month. I had convinced myself it must have been one of the kids' items. Mary's, maybe? But now I realized that was just a lie I told myself to avoid confronting the truth. The signs had always been there, and I had ignored them. I thought I was protecting my family by turning a blind eye, but all I had done was enable Paul's behavior. The guilt washed over me in waves, and I couldn't escape it. I had failed to see the cracks in our marriage, and now the damage was beyond repair. I tried to distract myself, to focus on anything other than the train wreck that was my life. But every time I looked at Paul, every time I heard his voice or saw him come home from work, I was reminded of the betrayal. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. The man I had spent 2 decades with, the man I had built a life with, had shattered my trust in the most cruel and painful way possible. He wasn't the man I thought he was, and as much as I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, a part of been a slow build-up to this. I had always suspected that something was off, but the idea that it could be this severe never crossed my mind. What disturbed me most was the realization that Paul hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed our son. Eric trusted Paul, looked up to him, and considered Amy part of our family. How could he do this? The thought of telling Eric made my stomach churn. He loved Amy with all his heart, and now I had to figure out how to shatter that world, knowing how much it would hurt him. I couldn't even begin to imagine how he would react. Would he hate me for revealing this to him? Would he blame me for not seeing the signs sooner? And then there was Mary. She was only 15, but I could see how affected she was by the tension in the house. She wasn't blind to the changes in her father, to the distance that had been growing between me and Paul. She had noticed that things weren't right, but I couldn't bear to drag her into this mess. She deserved to be protected from all of this. The thought of losing my children's trust was unbearable. The more I thought about it, the more I felt trapped. I couldn't escape this nightmare. I couldn't turn back time. Every time I looked at Paul, I felt a wave of disgust and betrayal. The man I had loved and trusted for so long had shattered my sense of security, my sense of self. I didn't know who he was anymore, and I wasn't sure if I even cared to find out. But still, a part of me held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I was misreading everything. Maybe there was some explanation, some reason for his behavior that I couldn't see. Perhaps I was overreacting, letting my insecurities cloud my judgment. But every time I thought about it, every time I saw the evidence that seemed to scream at me from his phone and computer, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I tried to talk to Paul, to get him to open up, but every time I broached the subject, he shut down. He would go silent, change the topic, or become defensive. His guilt was so palpable that it almost made me sick. How could he look me in the eyes and act like nothing was wrong? How could he sit there, acting like everything was fine, knowing what he had done? I started to wonder if he had been waiting for this moment. Was he waiting for Amy to turn 18? Had he been planning this affair for longer than I realized? The thought of it, I tried to shake it off, convinced I had misread it. But the image of that text lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. Over the next few days, I found myself constantly distracted. I couldn't focus on anything. The weight of that message felt like it was crushing me. I had always known something felt off with Paul, but never in a million years did I imagine this. Then came the computer. One evening, when Paul was out, I sat at his desk, unable to shake the need to know more. I opened his laptop, and there it was, a folder filled with files I should never have seen. My hands shook as I scrolled through images. It was porn. BDSM porn, to be exact. I was stunned, but that wasn't the worst part. As I looked deeper into the files, I discovered something I couldn't ignore. Photos of Amy. They weren't anything explicit. She was fully clothed in each picture, just snapshots she had posted on Instagram, but the realization hit me like a freight train. Paul had saved them. Why? What did this mean? Was he obsessing over her? My stomach turned as I thought about it. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop looking. I checked Paul's phone whenever I could, my mind racing with questions I was too terrified to ask out loud. The messages between him and Amy grew more disturbing. He would call me old, fat, and laugh with her. He would tell her how she made him feel alive again, how she was so much younger and beautiful than I could ever be, and she would laugh, sending emojis as if it was all a joke. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth in his face, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed by fear. Fear of what I might learn next. Fear of the consequences. Fear of what this would do to my family, to my son. How could I even begin to explain something so vile? How could I tell Eric that the girl he adored, the girl he had been in love with for years, was the one who had betrayed him through my husband? The days that followed were a blur of dread and confusion. Every time I saw Paul, I felt like I was looking at a stranger, a man I no longer knew. I couldn't escape the image of those messages, of the things he said about me to Amy. How had he become this person? How had I allowed myself to ignore the signs for so long? I replayed every moment in my head, every argument, every small act of distance. Could this betrayal have started years ago, and I simply turned a blind eye? Paul's long hours, his coldness, the way he would retreat into his work had it all. For nearly 2 decades, I believed my marriage was just going through a rough patch. But last week, everything changed when I accidentally stumbled upon a text that left me in complete shock. My husband, Paul, was having an affair with someone I never could have imagined. Our 18-year-old son's girlfriend, Amy. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks, but what was even more unsettling was the strange behavior from Paul around the time Amy turned 18. How did I miss all the signs, and what do I do now? For nearly 20 years, my life with Paul, my husband, had been a mixture of routine and unspoken tension. Paul worked long hours in finance, and as the years went by, we drifted further apart. The spark we once had faded, and though I tried to stay connected, I often felt invisible. We had 2 kids, Eric, our 18-year-old son, and Mary, our 15-year-old daughter. Eric was the joy of my life, and I adored him with all my heart. But things with Paul, well, they weren't the same. We rarely connected outside of the practical matters of running the household, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of both age and time settling between us. Then there was Amy, Eric's girlfriend. She had been in his life since they were freshmen in high school, a sweet, bubbly girl with a smile that could light up the room. Amy quickly became someone I considered part of the family, and I would often joke with Eric about her being the perfect match for him. My son adored her, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in their relationship. To me, she was like a daughter I never had. But one afternoon, everything changed. It was a lazy day, and I was cleaning around the house while Paul worked late. His phone buzzed with a message, and as I walked past him I caught a glimpse of the screen. My eyes froze. The message was from Amy. I didn't mean to look, but I saw it clearly. "I miss sucking your cock." My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't make sense of what I had just read. Was I imagining things? It felt like a sick joke, but deep down I knew I wasn't mistaken.